the 1970s and 80s, Hong Kong cinema was at its golden age. Action films, horror films, and crime thrillers were produced one after another. Back then, film crews often had to travel across Southeast Asia or to other parts of Asia for shooting. Remote mountains, old temples, and abandoned hotels, these places were quiet, isolated, and carried a strange kind of energy. Some people said that the more you filmed in places like that, the easier it was to run into something unclean. Many of those strange stories later became well-known rumors in the film industry. Some people laughed them off as jokes, but others, those who actually saw things with their own eyes, never dared to talk about them again. This time, our story is about two of the most legendary figures in Hong Kong cinema, Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung. Both are true kung fu superstars. They never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, until one night, they each experienced something that changed their minds. Some say it was only coincidence, but after you hear what really happened to them, you might start to wonder, maybe ghosts do exist. The first story came directly from Jackie Chan himself. He once shared the entire experience in a TV interview. That show was famous at the time for being completely open, no script, no rehearsal. By then, Jackie Chan was already a huge international star. He didn't need to make up ghost stories to get attention. So when he told the story, people could tell he wasn't exaggerating. He was just describing something he himself didn't understand. Jackie has always been known as a man of action. In his movies, he does every stunt himself, never superstitious, never believing in fate, and definitely not in ghosts. In interviews, he even said that things like ghost encounters or evil spirits were just people scaring themselves. But some things don't disappear just because you don't believe in them. Jackie once said that he met the same woman 3 times in 3 different places. He still doesn't know if she was a human being or something else. The first time happened in the late 1970s, when he was filming in South Korea. It was freezing cold, and the crew finished shooting around 2 or 3 in the morning. Jackie returned to the hotel, thinking about the action scenes for the next day as he turned on the heater. The room wasn't big. He remembered clearly, on his left was the bathroom, and by the door hung a full-length mirror. He was exhausted, lay down sideways facing the mirror, and quickly fell asleep. Late that night, he suddenly woke up, not because of a sound, but because of a strange, heavy pressure in the air. He said it felt as if the whole room had stopped moving. He tried to roll over, but couldn't. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw something in the mirror, a figure. At first, he thought it was his reflection, but when he looked closer, he realized that figure wasn't in the mirror. It was standing right beside his bed. A woman, dressed in white, with long black hair covering her face, was standing there silently, her head slightly lowered, as if she was watching him. Jackie said he was wide awake. It didn't feel like a dream. He even looked down to check if his hands were pressing on his chest, thinking maybe it was sleep paralysis or being pressed by a ghost. But his hands were flat beside him. He was fully aware, yet couldn't move. Time seemed frozen. Eventually, he drifted back into sleep. When the morning sunlight came through the window, everything looked normal again. But deep inside, a small crack of fear had already formed. 2 years later, he went to Korea again for another movie, this time with director Lo Wei. They shared a small room in the Chosen Hotel in Seoul. The bed was narrow, 2 men squeezed together. Jackie even joked, "Last time I saw a ghost in Korea. No way I'll be that unlucky again." But that night, when everything was silent, he suddenly woke up again. There was no wind, no sound, yet the air felt wrong. He opened his eyes and saw the same woman. Long hair, white clothes, head lowered. She was less than a foot away. He was terrified and shouted, "Don't touch me," mixing Korean and Chinese in panic. The director woke up and turned on the light, asking, "What's wrong?" Jackie pointed to the side of the bed, his voice shaking. "There's a woman." The director looked around and said, "There's no one here." Jackie swore he saw her clearly, but the director saw nothing. In that moment, the woman slowly stepped backward and faded away into the light. The air in the room returned to normal. Jackie couldn't sleep again that night. Afterward, he told his Korean friends what had happened. They said there was a local legend that white-clothed women in Korea could be either vengeful spirits or protective ones. Hearing that made Jackie feel a bit better. Maybe he thought the woman he saw wasn't there to harm him. In fact, after that, every movie he worked on seemed to go surprisingly well. He half joked, maybe that ghost was actually helping me. But the third time, in 1981, was completely different. The year he was filming in Hong Kong. After a long day of work, he returned to his hotel room around 4 in the morning. The room was newly renovated, with a large bed and shiny metal panels on the walls. He turned on the air conditioner, pulled the curtains shut, and fell asleep alone. In the middle of the night, he suddenly heard a soft voice whisper right beside his ear, "Jackie." His heart froze. He turned his head immediately. No one was there. The curtains were tightly closed, and not a single bit of light came in. Suddenly, a cold wind brushed the back of his neck, blowing right across his face. The air conditioner was on the opposite wall, too far for the wind to reach him. Yet a cold draft brushed the back of his neck, creeping upward, slow and deliberate, until his whole body went stiff. He started chanting, trying to calm himself, but his fingers only trembled, his body still wouldn't move. A few seconds later, another gust of wind came, even stronger this time. Jackie struggled, and finally he managed to hit the light switch. The room lit up instantly. He sat up, gasping for air. In the mirror on the wall, he saw his own pale reflection staring back at him. The next morning, the hotel staff called to say his room had suddenly lost power and that they needed to move him. Strangely, his was the only room on the whole floor that had any problem. But Jackie, being stubborn, refused to move and said, "I'm fine, I'm not scared." That night, when he came back, he opened the door. The room was pitch black, except for a dim floor light shining in the corner. He pretended to be calm, took a shower, changed his clothes, but his eyes kept glancing at the mirror. Around midnight, he heard a faint crackling sound. He walked over and saw the TV plug sparking, a small burst of light flashing from the socket. He sighed in relief, thinking that was the cause, unplugged it, and went back to bed. But only a few minutes later, another sound appeared, not electrical, but a low murmur, like someone whispering and quietly crying. That was when Jackie completely lost his composure. He grabbed the phone and called the front desk, shouting, "Please change my room." The staff could hear the panic in his voice and came immediately. After moving rooms, the rest of the night was peaceful. Later, when he looked back, Jackie noticed that all 3 encounters happened while he was filming. He began to believe that maybe those spirits were connected to his state of mind when he worked, exhausted, fully focused, and caught between reality and imagination. He said, "Just because we can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist." The woman in white in Korea, the cold wind in Hong Kong, the voice whispering his name. To him, they were no longer horror stories, but reminders. They reminded him that no matter how successful a person becomes, when facing the unknown, you must always stay humble. After Jackie Chan's story, the next one is about his senior, Sammo Hung. Both of them are kung fu superstars, spending countless nights shooting on set and traveling all over the world. But this time, what happened to Sammo wasn't another action scene. It was a strange, ghostly night, hidden behind laughter. Sammo Hung has always been known in the industry as brave and practical. After so many years of filming, he's even worked on a few action horror movies, but he always said he didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. Until one night, after finishing a shoot, he admitted that something that evening really didn't feel right. That time, he was working on a comedy action movie. The crew had been filming nonstop for days, and everyone was completely exhausted. After wrapping up, the director suggested they all stay a bit longer to watch some of the finished scenes. The screening was held in a large hall filled with warm yellow light. Laughter echoed through the room as funny moments played on the screen. Sammo couldn't help but laugh when he saw his own clumsy takes. The atmosphere was cheerful. Even the assistant director laughed until his eyes were watery. By the time the screening ended, it was already close to midnight. Sammo told everyone, "All right, we've got another shoot tomorrow, let's call it a night." He went back to his own resting room. His room was right next to the hall, the door facing the corridor. Inside, the lighting was soft, the TV was off, and the air was quiet. He took a shower, got into bed, and quickly fell asleep. He didn't know how long he had been sleeping when he suddenly woke up. No one called him, there was no alarm, but from outside came the sound of laughter. It was exactly the same as what they had just heard from the movie earlier. He thought to himself, who would still be up this late, replaying that? At first, he assumed some crew members hadn't left yet and were still watching in the hall. He could clearly hear the sound of the TV, the dialogue, even the bursts of laughter, exactly the same as before. The sound seemed to drift from far away, then closer, as if there were real people outside. He frowned, starting to feel uneasy. That footage, he remembered, they had already turned the TV off. He put on his jacket, opened the door, and stepped into the corridor. The hallway was unusually quiet, lit only by the cold white glow of fluorescent lights. The closer he got to the hall, the clearer the laughter became, as if a crowd was gathered around the screen. A chill crept up his back, and his steps slowed down. When he reached the door, he gently pushed it open. The air conditioning was still running. The TV was on, replaying the same funny scenes from earlier. The whole room was brightly lit, but there wasn't a single person inside. The chairs hadn't moved, the tables were clean, no cups, no footprints, nothing. The only thing left was the sound from the screen, echoing softly, layer after layer, through the empty air. Sammo later said that in that moment, the hair on the back of his neck stood straight up. He froze for a few seconds, then suddenly felt a gust of wind sweep across his back. At that exact moment, the laughter stopped. The TV screen flickered once, then went completely black. He didn't dare look again. He quickly stepped back into his room and locked the door. The next morning, he asked the crew if anyone had stayed behind to watch the footage. Everyone said they had gone back early. No one had turned on the TV again. From that day on, Sammo never watched his own scenes alone at night. He laughed about it later and said, "I'm not afraid of making ghost movies. I'm just afraid someone's still watching them after I finish." Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung. One met a woman in white while filming abroad. The other found himself surrounded by laughter in an empty hall. Both stories sound like rumors, but the men who told them are real kung fu legends. They've faced countless dangers on screen without fear, but it's these invisible forces that made them pause and start to believe that some things simply can't be explained by science. Maybe every filmmaker has, at some point, brushed against the other world. Some choose to stay silent, others choose to speak. So what do you think? Were these just strange coincidences, or quiet reminders that some stories don't end when the cameras stop rolling?